The discovery happened in a forgotten corner of the galaxy where no one had bothered to look for 3,000 years. A mining crew from the collective stumbled upon it while chasing a platinum-rich asteroid. They found something else instead. A structure, ancient beyond measure, built by hands that had turned to dust long before any current civilization had learned to make fire. Inside the structure were records, not the kind that needed translation or interpretation. These records spoke directly into the mind of anyone who touched them, memories preserved in crystal, showing images and feelings from a race that called themselves the Watchers. They had seen everything, documented everything, and they had left warnings. The mining crew brought their findings to the nearest collective outpost. Within days, scholars arrived. Within weeks, the Galactic Council demanded access. The records contained information about hundreds of species, ancient threats, forgotten technologies. But one warning repeated itself across multiple crystals, marked with symbols that translated to extreme danger. A planet third from its sun, yellow star, unremarkable in every measurable way, except for what lived there. The Watchers had observed this planet during what they called its primitive phase. The beings there fought constantly, not for territory or resources in the way other species did. They fought each other with a dedication that bordered on religious. Small tribes, big empires, it did not matter. They made weapons from rocks, then bronze, then iron, then steel. Each generation found new ways to kill their own kind. The Watchers had debated intervention. Some argued for extermination, others for uplifting. In the end, they chose neither. They left the planet alone and sealed their records with a warning that made the scholars uncomfortable. These beings, these humans, possessed something the Watchers called unstoppable momentum. Once they decided on a path, nothing could make them quit. Not logic, not casualties, not even certain defeat. The warning ended with a simple phrase repeated in 17 different formulations. Do not provoke them unless you are prepared for them to never stop. Council leader Bryn reviewed the records in his private chamber. His 4 arms moved across holographic displays, dismissing most of the data as superstition. The Watchers had been powerful, yes, but they had also been paranoid. They saw threats everywhere. This was just another example. Bryn pulled up current data on the planet in question. Earth, the locals called it. First contact had happened 8 months ago. Standard procedure. A collective scout ship had detected their radio signals and made peaceful approach. The humans had been surprised but welcoming. Eager even. They wanted to trade, to learn, to join the wider galactic community. Nothing about them suggested danger. Their technology was crude. Their ships barely capable of reaching their own neighboring planets. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles and explosive devices. Children's toys compared to particle beams and quantum disruptors. They had no unified government. Hundreds of different nations squabbling over resources and imaginary lines on their maps. Bryn dismissed the warning with a gesture. The Watchers had been wrong. Humans were just another species joining the collective, weak, divided, and easily managed. Meanwhile, in a conference room 3 levels below, Ambassador Rena Akoy sat across from a panel of collective bureaucrats. She had been chosen to represent humanity because of her diplomatic experience and her ability to remain calm under pressure. 20 years in UN peacekeeping operations had taught her patience. The bureaucrats were explaining the terms of Earth's integration into the collective. Standard procedure, they said. Human ships would need to register with collective traffic control. Human colonies would need to follow collective settlement protocols. Human military forces would need to be documented and limited to defensive operations only. Rena listened carefully. She asked questions. She took notes. She smiled politely when they made jokes about human primitiveness. Inside, she was calculating. These aliens saw humanity as simple, as weak. They were making the same mistake humans had made countless times throughout history. They were confusing lack of current technology with lack of capability. The meeting ended with handshakes and promises of future cooperation. Renee returned to her quarters on the human embassy ship and immediately sent a coded message to Earth. The collective was not hostile, but they were arrogant. They would push boundaries, test limits. Humanity needed to be ready. On the other side of the station, historian Vorn sat in an archive chamber reading the Watcher records for the 5th time. Unlike Bryn, Vorn had actually studied ancient civilizations. He understood that warnings from extinct species should be taken seriously. The Watchers had not been paranoid. They had been experienced. Vorn highlighted certain passages. The humans fought a war that killed 50 million of their own kind, then did it again 20 years later. They split the atom and immediately used it as a weapon. They created diseases in laboratories to study how to cure them. They sent machines to other planets before they had reliable transportation on their own. Everything they did suggested a species that pushed forward regardless of cost. The historian tried to schedule a meeting with Bryn. Denied. He tried to present his findings to the military council. Ignored. He tried to publish his analysis in academic journals. Rejected for being too speculative. No one wanted to hear that the friendly, eager humans might be exactly what the Watchers had warned about. 3 months later, the first dispute arose. A human colony ship had settled on a moon that the collective claimed belonged to their territory. The claim was old and barely documented, but it was official. The collective demanded the humans leave. The humans refused politely, citing galactic settlement law that favored active colonization over historical claims. Bryn saw an opportunity. A simple demonstration of power would put the humans in their place, make them understand the natural order. He authorized a fleet deployment, nothing aggressive, just a show of force. 3 battlecruisers would move into the system and encourage the humans to reconsider. The fleet departed with full media coverage. Citizens across the collective watched with amusement as their mighty warships headed toward the primitive human settlement. Some made bets on how quickly the humans would evacuate. Most guessed within hours of the fleet's arrival. In his archive chamber, Vorn watched the news feeds with growing horror. He pulled up the Watcher records one more time and read the final warning. If you show them violence, they will show you what violence truly means. They have practiced it on themselves for thousands of years. You are not ready for what they have learned. He tried one last time to contact Bryn. One last warning. One last chance to stop what was about to begin. His message was marked as read but never answered. The fleet was already in human space, and the galaxy was about to learn why the Watchers had been afraid. 3 collective battlecruisers emerged from quantum slip space at the edge of the disputed system. Their arrival sent cascading energy waves across local sensors, announcing their presence with unmistakable authority. General Cass stood in the command center of the lead ship, reviewing tactical displays with satisfaction. The human settlement registered on scans as a small cluster of habitation domes and basic infrastructure. Pathetic, really. The communication channels opened automatically. Cass activated the standard intimidation protocol. His voice broadcast across all frequencies, translated into the crude human languages. The humans had 24 hours to evacuate. Failure to comply would result in forced removal. Resistance would be met with appropriate response. The message was clear, simple, and historically effective. 97% of species complied within the stated timeframe. What happened next confused every sensor operator on all 3 ships. The human settlement went dark. Not destroyed, not damaged, just dark. Power signatures dropped to minimum. Communication ceased. Life support continued, but nothing else transmitted. The small fleet of human cargo vessels that had been orbiting the moon suddenly fired their engines and retreated toward the outer system. Cass interpreted this as immediate surrender. He sent a smug message back to collective command. The humans understood power when they saw it. This would be concluded before dinner. He ordered his ships forward to begin verification of the evacuation. The first indication something was wrong came from the science officer. She reported unusual debris patterns in orbit around the moon, old satellites perhaps or construction equipment. Cass ignored it, irrelevant to the mission. The second indication was harder to dismiss. As the battle cruisers moved into medium orbit, proximity alarms began chirping. Small objects were moving toward them. Dozens of objects, hundreds. The science officer ran analysis and looked up with wide eyes. Kinetic kill vehicles. Hundreds of tons of metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. Simple, crude, and very, very effective at these ranges. Cass ordered evasive maneuvers. His ships were fast, but they were also massive. The kill vehicles were small and numerous. Point defense systems engaged, destroying many of the incoming projectiles, but not all, never all. 3 impacts, then 7, then 12. Armor held against the first few. Modern shielding technology absorbed kinetic energy efficiently. But the humans had done something unexpected. The kill vehicles were not solid metal. They were packed with smaller projectiles that separated on approach. Thousands of ball bearings moving at orbital velocities. Shrapnel clouds that overwhelmed defensive grids through pure volume. Shields flickered and failed under sustained bombardment. Hull breaches occurred. Not catastrophic, but concerning. Cass pulled his ships back, shocked and angry. This was not how primitives were supposed to fight. This was not honorable combat. This was the kind of thinking that came from species who had spent millennia finding efficient ways to kill their own kind. He requested additional forces. Collective Command hesitated. This was supposed to be a simple intimidation mission. Cass argued that the humans had fired first, unprovoked. The argument was technically false but strategically useful. Command authorized a full battle group. 7 more ships, proper military vessels with tested crews and advanced weaponry. While they waited for reinforcements, Cass studied the human tactics. His analysts explained what had happened. The humans had seeded their orbital space with simple kinetic weapons weeks ago, probably when they first arrived. They had turned routine mining equipment into weapons platforms. Mass drivers designed for moving asteroids had been reprogrammed to throw metal at incoming threats. Even the cargo ships that had retreated were likely armed with similar systems. It was clever in a wasteful, inelegant way. The kind of thinking that came from having too many resources and too much paranoia. Cass filed a report recommending immediate sanctions against Earth. These humans needed to learn proper conduct before someone got hurt. On the moon below, the colonists worked quickly. They had known this moment would come. Renaa had warned them. Earth had prepared them. Every human settlement beyond the home system had received the same instructions. Build defenses. Stay quiet about capabilities. Appear weak until you have no choice but to appear strong. The colony administrator, a woman named Ruth Hayes, coordinated the defensive efforts from an underground command center. She had served in 3 different terrestrial wars before retiring to space colonization. She knew what the collective could not comprehend. Humans did not fight to win glory. They fought to survive. And survival meant using every possible advantage, no matter how unglamorous. The collective reinforcements arrived 6 days later. Cass had used the time to map human defensive positions. He had identified weapon platforms, calculated firing solutions, prepared countermeasures. This time would be different. This time the humans would see what real military power looked like. The battle group moved in with coordinated precision. Particle beams swept orbital space, destroying the kinetic weapon platforms. Missiles tracked and eliminated the hidden satellites. The human cargo ships fled deeper into the system, unwilling to face proper warships. Within 2 hours, Cass had cleared the immediate orbital space. He prepared to send troops down to force the evacuation. The humans responded with nuclear weapons. Not many, just 3, small tactical devices by human standards, but the collective had not used nuclear weapons in combat for over 1,000 years. The radiation, the fallout, the barbaric primitive nature of fission reactions. It was unthinkable. 3 of Cass's ships took direct hits before defensive systems even recognized the threat. Modern shields were designed for energy weapons and kinetic impacts. They were not optimized for thermal expansion and electromagnetic pulses from nuclear detonations. 2 ships survived with heavy damage. 1 ship did not survive at all. 300 crew members became vapor and debris in the space between seconds. The remaining vessels retreated immediately, broadcasting emergency signals. This was no longer a police action. This was war, and the humans were fighting like nothing the Collective had ever encountered. Back at Collective headquarters, Bryn watched the footage in disbelief. The humans had used nuclear weapons, in space, against a superior force, without hesitation, without warning, without apparent concern for the consequences. The analysts tried to explain. The warheads had been low-yield, strategically placed, designed to disable rather than destroy. But that logic felt hollow when stacked against 300 dead crew members. Bryn made his decision. The humans would learn their place. He authorized full military mobilization, not a police action, not a demonstration, real war. The kind the Collective had not fought in 2 centuries, the kind they had forgotten how to lose. The war arrived at Earth's doorstep like a storm that had been building across light years. Collective forces assembled in unprecedented numbers. 70% of their total military capacity converged on human space from 6 different vectors. The fleet consisted of 200 warships, each capable of destroying continents. Support vessels numbered in the thousands. Troop carriers held armies that had conquered dozens of worlds. This was not a punitive expedition. This was extermination. Galactic media broadcast the deployment with running commentary. Analysts predicted human surrender within days. Some gave humanity credit for fighting longer than expected, but the math was simple. The Collective had resources, technology, and experience. Humans had desperation and primitive weapons. The outcome was predetermined. Admiral Owen Cross watched the incoming fleet from the command center buried 3 miles beneath the Rocky Mountains. Around him, officers coordinated defensive positions across 8 planets and 40 moons. Earth's military had mobilized completely. Every ship that could fly was in position. Every weapon platform was active. Every soldier was ready. They were outnumbered 5-1 in ships and 20-1 in total military assets. Cross had spent 30 years in naval service. He had studied every major conflict in human history: Nelson at Trafalgar, Togo at Tsushima, Nimitz in the Pacific. He understood what united all great naval commanders. They fought asymmetrically. They refused to accept the enemy's terms of engagement. They won by changing the rules. The Collective expected a defensive fight, humans protecting their worlds with desperate last stands. Cross gave them something else entirely. He gave them nothing to shoot at. Every human military vessel retreated inward, not fleeing, repositioning. They abandoned the outer colonies and mining stations, consolidated around the inner planets, drew the enemy deeper into prepared kill zones. Collective forces interpreted this as cowardice. They advanced eagerly, claiming abandoned territory. Their commanders congratulated themselves on easy victories. They sent messages back to collective space declaring the war nearly over. They were wrong. The first trap sprung in the asteroid belt. Collective ships moved through it in formation, scanning for human forces. What they found instead were asteroids, thousands of them, all moving, all accelerating, all aimed directly at the fleet. The humans had spent months attaching engines to space rocks, turning natural debris into guided missiles. Simple, crude, horrifyingly effective. Collective ships scattered, firing wildly at incoming asteroids. Some they destroyed, many they did not. Collisions occurred at orbital velocities. Mass and speed cared nothing for advanced technology. Hulls crumpled. Ships broke apart. Others survived but with crippling damage. The asteroid belt became a graveyard of wrecked vessels and floating debris. The second trap waited at Mars. Collective forces approached expecting light resistance from the barely terraformed colony. Instead, they encountered a defense grid that made the asteroid belt look gentle. Humans had militarized the entire planet. Every dome was a fortress. Every canyon held missile batteries. The two moons had been turned into weapons platforms, and the humans had done something unprecedented. They had armed their civilian population. Collective ground forces landed expecting to fight soldiers. They fought everyone: factory workers with rifles, scientists with explosives, children as young as 12 serving as spotters and runners. The collective had rules about warfare, designated combatants, clear uniforms, agreed upon conduct. Humans ignored all of it. Every citizen was a potential threat. Every building was a potential ambush. Urban warfare in domes and tunnels where advanced weapons had limited advantage. Collective casualties mounted, not catastrophically, not enough to stop the advance, but steady, constant, wearing down morale in ways the generals had not anticipated. Soldiers started hesitating before entering buildings. Pilots flew higher to avoid ground fire. Commanders requested more troops for what should have been simple operations. Commander Lux inherited control of the Mars operation after the previous commander was killed by a sniper. A civilian sniper, the reports said, former Olympic athlete who had learned to shoot in her 40s. Lux studied the tactical situation and made a difficult recommendation: bombardment from orbit, level the domes, accept civilian casualties as necessary cost of victory. The collective high command approved. The bombardment lasted 3 days. Particle beams and kinetic strikes reduced human positions to rubble. Casualty estimates reached 600,000. The galaxy watched in horror as the collective destroyed civilian infrastructure to win a military objective. Public opinion began to shift. Protests occurred on collective worlds. Questions were raised about proportionality and necessity. But the bombardment achieved its goal. Mars fell. Human forces retreated to Earth and its moon. The collective advanced, triumphant and relieved. Surely now the humans would surrender. Surely now they understood the futility of resistance. Admiral Cross sent a single message in response to collective demands for unconditional capitulation. No. Just that, no explanation, no negotiation, no acceptance of defeat. The collective prepared for the final assault on Earth. They gathered their forces in high orbit: 200 warships, tens of thousands of troops, weapons capable of rendering the planet uninhabitable. Bryn himself traveled to oversee the victory. He wanted to be present when humanity learned humility. Historian Vorn traveled with him, still trying to make someone listen. He brought the Watcher records, showed them to anyone who would look, explained that humans had survived worse than this. Ice ages, plagues, asteroid impacts, self-inflicted near extinctions. They always survived, they always recovered, and they never forgave. Bryn dismissed him one final time. The humans were cornered, outnumbered, outgunned. They would surrender or die. Those were the only options. Vorn returned to his quarters and wrote what he expected would be his final journal entry. The collective was about to learn why extinct species left warnings instead of just destroying threats. Because sometimes the lesson was more important than survival. Sometimes others needed to understand what happened when you ignored wisdom for pride. The fleet moved into assault positions. Earth rotated below, blue and green and peaceful. Cross gave the order. Every human asset activated simultaneously: defense satellites, ground bases, ships hidden in lunar craters, and one weapon the collective had not anticipated because no sane species would build it: a network of asteroid redirect systems pointed inward, toward Earth itself. The message was clear: if the collective destroyed Earth, humans would help. They would deny their own planet rather than let it be conquered. The ultimate expression of scorched earth policy: if we cannot have it, no one can. The battle for Earth lasted 16 hours and changed the galaxy forever. Neither side had expected it to be this brutal or this close. Collective forces pushed through human defenses with overwhelming firepower. losing ships at rates that shocked their commanders. Human forces fought with tactics borrowed from every conflict in their blood-soaked history, trading space for time and casualties for strategic advantage. When it ended, both sides were broken. The collective had lost 90 ships and 40,000 personnel. Earth had 3 cities in ruins, orbital infrastructure shattered, and over 2 million dead. Neither side had won. Neither side could continue. The fleets separated by mutual exhaustion, drifting in orbits around a planet that looked more damaged than victorious. In the aftermath, Bryn requested a meeting with the human leadership. Not a surrender negotiation, not a victory ceremony, just a conversation. He no longer knew what else to do. The war had stopped making sense somewhere between Mars and Earth, stopped following rules he had thought were universal. Renee accepted the meeting. She traveled to a neutral station maintained by a third-party species that wanted no part in this conflict. When she arrived, Bryn was shocked by her appearance. Renee looked exhausted. Her clothes were clean but simple. No medals, no ceremonial weapons. She carried a tablet with casualty reports and nothing else. She looked like someone who had been crying recently but was too tired to cry anymore. They met in a small conference room with minimal security, just 2 people trying to understand what had happened. Bryn started to speak about terms and conditions, then stopped. Renee was not looking at him. She was looking at the tablet, scrolling through names. Thousands of names. People who had died in the battle. People she had known or worked with or simply shared a planet with. Bryn asked her why humans had not surrendered. The question came out more curious than accusatory. Renee looked up and gave him an answer he had not expected. She said humans did not know how to surrender when their existence was threatened. Evolution had not given them that option. Every species they had encountered on Earth that gave up when cornered had gone extinct. Only the ones that fought beyond reason had survived. Humans were the descendants of survivors who refused to quit even when quitting made sense. She told him about the winter of 1944. German forces surrounded American troops in a Belgian forest. The German commander sent a message demanding surrender. The American commander replied with a single word, nuts. They held their position until relieved, taking catastrophic casualties in the process. That was just one example from one war in one century. Human history was full of such moments. Thermopylae, the Alamo, Stalingrad. Places where humans fought impossible odds because surrender was worse than death. Bryn listened and felt something he had not experienced in decades: uncertainty. His entire worldview had been built on the assumption that rational beings made rational choices, surrender when defeated, negotiate when outmatched, preserve existence above pride. Humans rejected all of that. They had been ready to destroy their own planet rather than accept conquest. That was not rational. That was not sane. But it was undeniably effective. Historian Vorn entered the room without invitation. He had been listening from outside and could not contain himself any longer. He placed the Watcher records on the table between Bryn and Renee, explained what the collective had ignored for months. The Watchers had studied humanity for centuries, watched them survive disasters that should have ended their species, documented their response to every existential threat. Fight until there is nothing left to fight with, then fight with your hands. The records contained specific examples. A human city called Leningrad that had been under siege for 900 days. Citizens ate bark and leather, froze to death in their homes, died by the hundreds of thousands, but never surrendered. The siege finally broke not because the defenders gave up, but because the attackers could no longer sustain it. The Watchers had noted this pattern repeatedly. Humans endured, humans adapted, humans outlasted. Vorn showed them another record, this one from human year 1962. 2 nuclear powers stood on the edge of mutual destruction, weapons capable of ending civilization, leaders who refused to back down. The world held its breath for 13 days. The crisis ended not through surrender but through negotiation, where both sides found ways to retreat without admitting defeat. Humanity had practiced this dance with extinction and survived. Renee added her own context. She explained that human children grew up with stories about never giving up. Every culture had them. Heroes who fought impossible odds, underdogs who won through determination, martyrs who died rather than compromise. These were not just entertainment. They were cultural programming, teaching each generation that persistence mattered more than probability. Bryn sat back in his chair, processing this information. He asked the question that had been growing in his mind since Mars. What would it take for humans to actually surrender? What line existed that they would not cross? Renat answered honestly. She did not know. Humans had never found that line. Every time they thought they had reached it, someone pushed further, survived worse, set a new standard for endurance. The three of them sat in silence for several minutes. Outside the station, both fleets waited for orders. Collective Command expected instructions to resume the assault. Human forces prepared for the next wave. Neither was likely to survive another battle of equal intensity. Both knew it. Neither would admit it first. Vorn broke the silence with a suggestion. He proposed that both sides study the other's history, really study it, not to find weaknesses but to understand motivations. Humans needed to learn why the collective fought wars. The collective needed to learn why humans never stopped fighting them. Understanding would not solve the current crisis, but it might prevent the next one. Bryn agreed, surprising himself. He sent messages to his commanders ordering a ceasefire, not surrender, not peace, just cessation of hostilities while both sides figured out what came next. Renat did the same. Human forces stood down but remained ready. Trust had not been established, just mutual recognition that continuing the war benefited no one. The galaxy watched this development with fascination. Two species locked in brutal combat suddenly stopped without clear victory. Media analysts struggled to explain it. Some called it weakness. Others called it wisdom. Most called it unprecedented. Wars did not pause. They ended with winners and losers. Clear outcomes. This situation had no clarity, just exhaustion and uncertainty and a growing realization that the rules everyone thought were universal might not apply to humanity. 5 months after the ceasefire, an unexpected problem emerged, not from humanity or the collective, but from somewhere neither had been watching. A species called the Devourers had been expanding along the galactic rim, consuming resources and eliminating resistance with methodical efficiency. They had avoided major powers, focusing on isolated colonies and minor civilizations, but their expansion had accelerated. They were coming toward collective space. Initial encounters were disasters. Collective forces engaged the Devourers using standard military doctrine, coordinated fleet actions, overwhelming firepower, tactical precision. The Devourers adapted within hours. Their ships learned from each encounter, modified their defenses, optimized their weapons. They fought like a swarm organism with perfect communication and zero hesitation. Within weeks, they had destroyed 3 collective battle groups and claimed 7 systems. Bryn faced a choice he had never imagined making. He could pull forces from the human border to fight the Devourers, leave Earth unwatched, trust that the ceasefire would hold, or he could maintain position against humanity and hope the Devourers could be contained without additional resources. Neither option felt safe. Both felt necessary. Commander Lux proposed a third option, one that made every military advisor in the room object immediately. Ask the humans for help, not as subordinates, not as conquered subjects, as allies. Humans had proven they could fight in ways the collective could not imagine. Perhaps they could fight in ways the Devourers could not predict. The proposal made its way through collective bureaucracy slower than anyone wanted. Committees debated, councils reviewed, politicians worried about appearance and precedent. While they talked, the Devourers claimed 2 more systems and killed another 400,000 collective citizens. Time was running out. Renat received the request during a memorial service for Mars casualties. She was standing in a field where 600,000 names had been carved into black stone. Each name represented a person who had died fighting the collective. Now that same collective wanted help fighting something worse. The irony was not lost on her. She brought the request to Earth's Unified Command Council. Military leaders, political representatives, and civilian advisors all weighed in. Opinions split predictably. Some wanted revenge, demanded the collective suffer the way humanity had suffered. Others saw opportunity, a chance to prove human value to the galaxy. A few saw necessity. If the Devourers defeated the collective, humanity would face them alone and unprepared. Admiral Cross provided the deciding argument. He reminded the Council of something fundamental about human military history. Humans had allied with former enemies more times than anyone could count. Britain and France after centuries of war. America and Japan after nuclear weapons. Germany integrated into Europe after 2 world wars. Humans understood that today's enemy could be tomorrow's ally if circumstances changed enough. The Devourers had changed circumstances. Earth voted to provide military assistance, not full commitment, not unlimited support, but real help. 20 ships under Cross's command, military advisors, tactical specialists, people who understood asymmetric warfare and unconventional thinking. The fleet departed within a week, traveling to collective space for the first time as invited guests rather than invaders. The first joint operation was a mess. Collective commanders expected humans to follow standard protocols. Humans ignored half the orders and improvised constantly. Communication broke down. Coordination failed. The battle against a Devourer scouting force became chaotic and nearly ended in friendly fire incidents. Both sides retreated to regroup, frustrated and questioning the entire arrangement. Cross met with Collective Fleet Commander Tarn afterward. They argued for 3 hours about proper military procedure. Cross finally stopped the argument by asking a simple question. How many battles had the Collective won against the Devourers using proper procedure? Tarn admitted the truth. None. 0 victories. Only managed retreats and damage limitation. Cross explained the human approach. Humans did not fight to look good or follow doctrine. They fought to win. That meant using whatever worked, changing tactics mid-battle, taking risks that seemed insane, accepting casualties if it achieved objectives. The collective could either accept this or fight the Devourers alone. Tarn chose to accept it. The second joint operation went better. Human ships acted as raiders while collective forces provided heavy firepower. Humans struck fast at unexpected angles, forcing Devourer ships to expose weaknesses. Collective ships hit those weaknesses with concentrated fire. The coordination was not elegant, but it worked. The Devourers lost ships for the first time in weeks. More importantly, they seemed confused by the unpredictable human tactics. Word of the victory spread quickly. More collective commanders requested human assistance. Cross distributed his forces, sending small teams to advise different fleets. Human tactical thinking started influencing collective strategy. Ambushes replaced frontal assaults. Deception replaced predictability. Acceptable losses replaced zero-casualty doctrine. The Devourers began losing ground, slowly at first, then faster as the combined forces found their rhythm. Systems were reclaimed. Colonies were liberated. The tide turned not because of superior technology or numbers, but because of superior adaptability. The Devourers could learn from encounters, but humans could learn faster, could improvise, could do things that made no logical sense but worked anyway. During a brief rest period between operations, Cross and Tarn shared a meal in the officers' mess of a combined fleet carrier. They discussed the war, the losses, the victories, the strange partnership between former enemies. Tarn asked Cross why humans had agreed to help after everything the collective had done. The bombardment of Mars, the deaths, the invasion of Earth. Cross gave him an answer that came from studying too many wars. He said humans understood that grudges were expensive. Revenge felt good but accomplished nothing. The collective had been wrong to invade. Humanity had been right to resist. Both sides had paid for their choices in blood and treasure, but the past could not be changed. Only the future was flexible, and the future needed both species working together, or neither would have a future at all. Tarn processed this and asked a follow-up question. Did Cross forgive the collective for Mars? Cross answered honestly, no. Forgiveness took time and might never come, but forgiveness was not required for cooperation. Working together did not mean forgetting. It meant choosing practical outcomes over emotional satisfaction. Humans had practice at that. Centuries of practice. The conversation ended when alarms signaled another devourer attack. Both commanders rushed to their stations, falling into the now familiar pattern of coordinated response. Human unpredictability combined with collective firepower. The partnership was not perfect. Trust was incomplete, but it was working. And in war, working was enough. The war with the Devourers ended not with a final battle but with a slow, grinding halt. After 18 months of combined operations, the Devourers stopped advancing, stopped attacking, withdrew to their original territory and went silent. Analysis suggested they had reassessed the cost-benefit ratio of expansion and found it unfavorable. They had encountered something they could not efficiently consume. Humans fighting alongside the collective created too many variables, too much unpredictability, too high a casualty rate for acceptable gains. The galaxy breathed collectively and began the long process of recovery. Planets needed rebuilding, fleets needed repair, economies needed stabilization, and relationships needed redefining. The question everyone avoided asking directly was simple. What happened now between humans and the collective? Bryn proposed a formal treaty, not just a ceasefire extension but actual peace with terms and conditions. Renat countered with a different suggestion, not peace through treaty but partnership through shared experience. The war had forced cooperation. Why not make that cooperation permanent? Formalize the military alliance. Extend it to trade and technology sharing. Build something new rather than just ending something old. The negotiations took 3 years, not because of disagreement but because of complexity. Humans and collective species thought differently about fundamental concepts: ownership, authority, individual rights versus collective good, justice, compensation. Every topic required careful discussion and compromise. Both sides learned patience they had not known they possessed. The final agreement surprised the galaxy. Humans received full collective membership with equal voting rights. Their colonies were recognized as legitimate. Their military was integrated into collective defense structures but retained independent command. In exchange, humans agreed to share their tactical doctrines and training methods. They would teach other species how to think like humans when necessary, how to fight like humans when unavoidable. Admiral Cross retired from active military service but accepted a new role, director of the Galactic Strategic Studies Institute. His job was to train collective officers in asymmetric warfare and unconventional tactics. The first classes were awkward. Collective students struggled with concepts like acceptable casualties and strategic retreat. Cross was patient. He explained that these were not natural instincts. Humans had learned them through failure, through loss, through wars where the alternative to unconventional thinking was extinction. He taught them human military history, not as academic study but as applied learning, showed them how Vietnam had proven that technology alone could not win wars, how Afghanistan had demonstrated that determination outlasted superior firepower, how countless small nations had resisted empires through guerrilla tactics and popular support. The lessons were uncomfortable. They challenged everything collective doctrine taught about proper warfare, but they were effective. Officers who completed the program thought differently, fought differently, survived different threats. Renat's path took her in a different direction. She ran for Galactic Council and won by a margin that shocked political analysts. Humans voted for her overwhelmingly, but so did many collective citizens who had watched her during the war, who had seen her mourn casualties and seek peace while never surrendering principle. She became the first human council leader 5 years after the treaty signing. Her first major initiative created controversy. She proposed mandatory study of the Watcher records for all council members, not as historical curiosity but as practical warning system. The Watchers had documented dangers across the galaxy, species to avoid, territories to respect, threats that could not be fought conventionally. Their wisdom had been ignored once. Renan made sure it would not be ignored again. Historian Vorn lived long enough to see his life's work validated. The Watcher archives became required reading in schools across collective space. His published analysis of human exceptionalism sold millions of copies. He spent his final years teaching at universities, explaining to young students why warnings from extinct species mattered, why arrogance killed civilizations, why understanding was more valuable than conquest. He died peacefully, knowing his warnings had finally been heard. The real changes happened slowly and quietly. Human engineers worked alongside collective scientists, combining innovative thinking with advanced technology. Human doctors shared their experience with trauma and mass casualty response, improving medical systems galaxy-wide. Human artists and musicians brought new perspectives to cultures that had become stagnant. The exchange went both ways. Humans learned collective physics and mathematics, adopted their recycling technologies and energy systems, built ships that combined human ingenuity with collective precision. 20 years after first contact, a young collective student asked Renan a question during a public forum. Are humans still unstoppable? The question was asked nervously as if the student feared giving offense. Renan smiled and gave an answer she had been preparing for years. She said humans were never unstoppable. They just never stopped trying. There was a difference, important difference. She explained that being unstoppable suggested invincibility. Humans were not invincible. They died easily, bled like everyone else, felt pain and fear and doubt. But they had learned through hard experience that stopping meant dying. So they kept moving forward, kept adapting, kept searching for solutions even when none seemed possible. That was not invincibility. That was survival instinct refined across millennia. The student asked a follow-up. Should other species fear humanity? Renan considered the question carefully before answering. She said fear was the wrong framework. Respect was better. Humans could be dangerous when threatened. History proved that. But they could also be loyal allies, generous partners, creative problem solvers. The choice of which humanity you encountered depended largely on how you approached them. Treat them as enemies and they would fight like their existence depended on it. Treat them as partners, and they would stand beside you against any threat. The forum ended with applause. Renan returned to her office and found a message waiting. The Devourers had been detected moving again, not toward collective space, toward an unaligned region where primitive species had no defense. The message was a request. Would humanity help again, not for treaty obligations, not for political advantage, but because species that could not defend themselves needed protection? Renan sent her response within minutes. Yes, humans would help, because that was what partners did, what allies did, what survivors who remembered their own struggles did for others facing similar threats. She authorized fleet deployment and sent a message to Cross. Time to teach another generation of officers why humans fought, not for glory or conquest, but for the simple, stubborn belief that those who could help had an obligation to those who could not. The galaxy was learning what the Watchers had tried to warn them about. Humans could not be stopped, but the Watchers had missed something important in their analysis. Humans also could not be turned away when someone needed help. That combination of traits made them dangerous enemies, but it made them irreplaceable friends.